Welcome to my stream. We're going to be doing something really requested in the last week, which is watching the lockpicking lawyer's video about my lock. And obligatory, of course, if you haven't seen the lockpicking lawyer's video, don't watch this. It's not going to make any sense and it's going to spoil it. So just go watch that. I'll put a link in the description. And what I'm going to do is just go through it and talk about kind of my thoughts on what happened and how I might fix the things, and just kind of give a bit more information on how it all went down. And it looks like we got 15 people in here, so let's just jump into it. Let's see. I'm going to pause a lot and stop to talk so I don't talk over him. I think that it just is clear.
This is the lockpicking lawyer, and the video you're about to watch is the culmination.
So something that a lot of people seem to think, at least based on the comments that I've gotten, is that I had no idea it was going to happen until I saw this video. And that's not the case at all. I was talking to him the whole time, and I knew basically exactly what was going to happen. I wasn't sitting there thinking like, oh man, am I going to be screwed or whatever. And it is interesting. One of the attacks, I'll talk about this more when it comes up, he found out like hours before this video went live. So that one was a bit of a surprise, but I still knew about it.
Of a series of events that started about 6 months ago. That's when Shane at the excellent YouTube channel Stuff Made Here posted a video build of an unpickable lock. That video, which I will link below, also challenged me to open it.
It is just so weird. Probably the strangest thing about this video was just seeing my locks in someone else's video. Just watching a lockpicking lawyer video where it's like I made that lock and he's holding it and messing with it. It's just, I don't know. I found it like surreal and very strange to see.
I obviously accepted because the lock is here, but Shane wanted to improve his design first. And by improve, he seems to have meant completely redesign from the ground up.
That wasn't actually my intention going into this. So my plan originally, when I made this lock, I knew about the pin drop attack. I noticed it when I was editing the video. Some other people noticed it right when I posted the video. And what I was originally planning to do is fix the pin drop attack by putting a special cam that it would basically force the mechanism that holds the pins up from being released, so you just can't drop them. And then a few other little changes. And then I was going to send that to the lockpicking lawyer. I basically was not happy with the number of pins and some other stuff that I talk about in my video. So I sat down and was like, okay, if I just take a slight design pass on this, could I add 5 pins? Could I make it a little better? And then like the next day, I had a completely different designed lock. And then I said, okay, well, what I'm going to do is just quickly make this, in like a week, and then send it to him, and then he can pick both. I wasn't actually planning to make a video about it. But then, of course, I ran into so many problems as I was making it and getting it working. I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a video because this is interesting enough. I didn't think it would be, but it turned out to be. So that's kind of how I worked my way into making a video and a whole new lock. Was not intentional. I also wasn't working on it for 6 months. It was like the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Because what I received was the original lock and a second lock which bore no internal resemblance to the first. And I have to say I had a great time with these because both mechanisms are, to the best of my knowledge, completely original and
So that right there in the entire video is the thing that makes me the happiest. The fact that he is saying that, at least as far as he knows, they're original. So something I didn't do when I went to work on these locks is look at other locks. I don't actually know much about locks. I know how they work, but I'm not a lock picker, and I intentionally didn't because I didn't want to bias myself. So if I looked at how other people made strong locks, I would just end up making that lock rather than something interesting and something hopefully new. And so that ended up hurting me a little bit, as you know, if you've seen this video. But it did, I think, help me come up with some interesting ideas because I just didn't have anything to draw from other than my own imagination.
in my opinion, quite good. Fortunately for me though, Shane doesn't have a lot of experience with lock defeat methods, so there were a few minor oversights that I was able to exploit.
I felt that in my soul when he said that.
Each of the issues I found can be fixed with very little effort, which would result in formidable lock designs. Before we pick these, I want to explain what I'm...
So one other little point on the original lock and why I didn't fix it. So the first reason is that it didn't seem fair to make a video saying I've made an unpickable lock and then change it before I sent it to him. It seemed a little disingenuous. And so I wanted to just leave it in the state that it was. And then the other reason was that I thought there was a good chance he could actually exploit that weakness. And I wanted him to have a win. Like if I just made locks that he couldn't pick, that's not interesting, really. It's much more interesting if he can find a problem and then I fix it or whatever. You get to learn something and it's much more interesting. And then also from his perspective, it sucks to be sent locks and then if you can't pick them, it's like, that's pretty lame for him. And so I wanted him to have a win. That's the other reason I didn't change it. And I didn't know how the second one would go or not. So that felt like a safe thing I could do.
I'm going to do so my actions don't look too cryptic. That will require some reference to the internals. But if you want a detailed look at what's inside, you need to check out the stuff made here.
He said if I limited the pin drop, he doesn't know how he can get through the first one.
The first lock, this one, looks something like this on the inside.
So this is kind of funny. He was asking me for some CADs that he could explain how they work. And I was like, well, I can send you the 3D files. I can send you video. What do you want? And he's like, I just want a picture so I can print it out on a piece of paper. It's like, all right. It was easy to do, but we have very different styles.
When you insert the key, the pins in contact with the key will lift these upper pins that are shown in gold. Those pins then lock into place and rotate until they're in contact with this fin. There are gates in the fin, and only if these upper pins are in the correct position will they pass through. Notably, however,
I think I talked about this attack in a Patreon post months ago.
They are no longer in contact with the key pins. That's what makes this unpickable in theory. What I'm going to do is lift.
The other neat thing about this lock that I don't think I ever talked about it is that you can actually have two different keys. Because there's two sets of gates that it has to go through, you can have a key that locks it and you have a different key that unlocks it. And I think that's kind of interesting. I'm sure there's locks like that, but I haven't seen them.
Lift all of the upper pins as far as they will go, lock them in place, rotate them until they're in contact with the fin, and then drop them down until they fall into their gates. It usually takes a few attempts for it to work, but the method seems to be reliable. The second lock is even more complex than the first. It actually has two cores.
I had a hard time trying to get a picture that wasn't totally insane.
Look at the back, we can see the
couldn't
bottom
rotate
core,
or do any
the top
animations.
core, and a connecting rod. The shear line that matters is the one on the upper core, which we can't access to tension. It's behind this area of the lock.
The whole thing about in theory is that,
bottom core is
that's
by about 45
that's kind of been
degrees,
the whole story, is these are theoretically unpickable.
That's why,
and that was actually one of the goals of this collaboration, is teach me how to make them
access the pins, you can't
in reality
and when you can't
nearly
tension
unpickable.
It, you
There'll probably always be some way to get through them, but as close to unpickable as I
try
can
to get around that by inserting a thin piece of metal between the door and the lock housing. Then slide it up until we're over the top of that upper core.
So when he told me about this one, we were talking on the phone about this before he was even going to do it, and it was like a total facepalm, because I had thought about this, and in my mind, I had always been thinking about just going through the keyway and getting through the lock. I had been thinking about it in the context of maybe drilling through and accessing the back of the lock to pull that arm, not sliding through like that. But it would have been so easy to prevent this. I did send him a piece that did it. It took me like an hour to make. I should have just done it, but I did not. I think it made for an interesting exploit, though, because it allowed him to actually pick it, and everyone really wanted to hear him say, we have a click out of 3 and all of that, which he did.
And then pull down, which should tension the upper core. Once that happens, I should be able to pick this as I would a normal lock.
The custom tool that I had
There are
mentioned
two other
was
potential
actually for
vulnerabilities.
decoding.
The first
So he talked
arises
about
from the
modifying a leashy
combination
tool,
of
which
this core
essentially allows you to push the pins up and then measure how far they go.
Until it seizes
And then that could allow him to decode it. But
piece being misclocked by about
because I have
45 degrees.
totally
When we
non-stock
pick,
pin
you'll
lengths and
see
spacings,
why
it
that
would have
makes
been a lot of
difference,
work.
but I think you'll get a
And
chuckle
probably
to
not
see
worth it
how
because
they
I can fix that
interact.
attack
The
literally
second
just by changing
vulnerability is
5
decoding,
pins.
and we can do that because all of these upper driver pins are the same length. A tool can
When
be
I was talking to him, I
fashioned
thought
lift
about
all the pin
sending him
stacks
another lock,
to
like
the
just really quickly
stopping
making one that had all the
point, fully
fixes.
compressing the springs.
And
That's
it didn't seem
an indirect
sportsmanlike.
way of measuring the key
The
pins,
the
which
rules of
would allow us to
engagement,
cut a key.
I thought what people
I did
wanted to
not
see
create that
was
tool
me
because
make
I
my
didn't know
best
the way
one
to
and then
open
give it to him,
But that's
and then
something that used to be
him
common
try to get through
before
it.
manufacturers
And it
started
didn't seem
varying
fair to,
these
like,
lengths.
He tells me how he might
I've
get
been
to it, and I just
talking
quickly
for
fix
too
it.
long. The jig that Shane sent me to pick these in is way too big to fit on my desk, so we are going
I like
to
how he
mount
calls
these
the
up,
door a
head
jig.
down to the garage and try
It's a front door for a little
Okay,
person
we
or a
are
dog.
down in the garage. Both locks are mounted in this mock door, and the frame is secured to my workbench. We're going to start.
I
with
do
the
wish I would have
door
added
to
more
locks and discuss a vulnerability
accessories to
enabled
the
by
door.
The fact that this core will turn.
Like if I told him he had to have a welcome mat, I actually bought a silkscreen kit to make a welcome mat for stuff in here, but
interacts with the
I just didn't
deadbolt.
get to it.
Now, under normal circumstances, a deadbolt that is fully extended can't be pushed back into the door. However, if we turn this core as far as it will go, it's just enough to
this exploit,
disengage the anti-retraction
he found
mechanism.
like
That's something we
in the middle of the
can
night
certainly
before
take
posting this
advantage of while
video.
the door is locked. All we need to do that
And-
is something that will turn the core and something.
Yeah, there was no
pointing
chance for me
at the
to
tip of my
fix it or
pocket
anything.
knife. So,
And then another thing a lot of
turn
people
this
have
as
asked me
far as it
about
will go.
is why is there such a big gap between the door and the jamb or whatever you call that? And it's actually geometric. So that is as small as I could possibly make that gap and the door still being able to open. As the door gets smaller and smaller, the distance that the back edge protrudes as you open it relative to the door frame increases. So you can imagine if the door was a millimeter thin, as it rotates, you need to gap half the width of the door for it to be able to open. And then as it gets longer and longer, that approaches 0. That's why there's such a big gap. I don't know much about doors, which is why I built it backwards. I just looked at an interior door and then just made that. I should have flipped it around like an exterior door, and then this attack also wouldn't have been possible.
Then use the point of the knife to walk
It is pretty funny though.
back.
Like, this is exactly the
Might as
kind of
well let
dumb
him
thing
know
that
we're
I was
here.
expecting to miss.
Next,
And
we are
when he told me
going
about it,
to
I was like,
attempt
oh,
a
of
picking
course.
attack, though
I
certainly
actually
not a
just
traditional one.
I just eyeballed the
We
parts
discussed it
for that
upstairs, but
tailpiece.
What I'm going to do is
I was just trying to get it
attempt
to
slip
not
this between the door
be able to
and the
unlock and
housing
not
so we
unlock
can tension
when you
upper
twisted the key.
core.
That's all I cared about. I didn't
Pushing
even
this
think
in
about the locking
will
mechanism.
do damage to the door. However, I don't think it'll be a lot of damage, and I don't think it'll be very noticeable because it'll be on the bottom. However, I will show you the damage after we're done. The hard part will be getting.
So
this
there was
in
actually a
position.
gap in the door that he could have just gone through. It was very sportsmanlike for him not to. He was
I am
like,
pushing the tool.
I don't think you
against
meant to
the
leave this
door
here.
so it doesn't.
And so he didn't go
deform.
through the little gap. I was actually with my family when this video premiered. I was in another city traveling, and we all watched it together. And when he opened it with the knife, they thought it was
I might
hilarious.
have it, but the only way to be sure is to pull on these pliers.
The doorbell
see if
ringing,
the pins are binding.
I think that's the best part of the whole
There we
video.
go. Click out of 1. Little click on 2. Nothing on 3. Little click on 4. Little click on 5.
No, I wish he would have opened the envelope. He actually forgot. I was talking to him before the videos premiered, and I asked him if he opened up the envelope, and he was like, "Oh no, I forgot." And he thought it was really funny.
I don't feel
And
anything
I
else. Let's
I
see
will
what
give him a new
happens.
lock. I promised within 2 years, so I got plenty of time. I think the minimum viable product there is just fixing these 3 issues. The doorbell is so good, and that would be really, really easy to do. I already fixed
Now let's
the
work on
the rear
older
access.
lock, Once again,
Although I feel like if I did another one, I would probably
while we were upstairs,
put a little more into it than
However,
just
it's a
changing
little
those
bit
things,
harder
but
in practice.
we'll see.
First, we need to lock it. Okay, I'm going to use this pick to lift all the pins.
I like his little
to
cut
their
down
highest
key so that he can
position.
access the pins but lock and unlock it. It's pretty cool. So what he was saying to me is that this one
And when I
usually would
release
work
these,
like
I'm going to
every
be
few times,
tapping
not every
on the
time, and so
housing with this
he was
mallet.
super happy when it
allows
just
for a
worked on
little
the
bit
first
more
try.
Control as the pins come down, and it increases the chances of success from about 1 in every 10 times to 1 in every 2 or 3.
Yeah, 2 or 3. So something that I was going to do and what I would do with this lock
I
is
think we've got it.
basically add false gates. So even if I make it so that he can't use that little key to push lock them and then release them like he did, it's still possible
folks, let's
hitting it with a
bring all this
hammer
stuff
or
back upstairs.
doing
I
whatever.
will show you
You
the
could
damage underneath.
make the pins
We
fall.
will sum everything
And so
up.
what I would do
Okay, folks, we are back
is-
upstairs.
let me pause. What I would do is add basically a fake indentation so that if he does find a way to get the pins to drop, they'll get trapped in a little slot and then they can't drop any further. So if you put 1 or 2 of those on a couple of the pins, then I think it would, I don't know how you could possibly do that attack, even with the drop. I just need to find a way to fit more pins into it.
And I'm going to briefly address how to fix each of the exploits I demonstrated, but first, let's take a look at the damage to the door. It's certainly noticeable once the lock is
More
removed,
screaming goat.
though much of the damage is covered by the lock, and the part that isn't is
My daughter
probably
loves my
obscured
screaming
because
goat.
it's underneath the bulky housing. Frankly, even if I saw that, I'd probably attribute it to sloppy installation and not to an attack.
I thought it's really interesting how much he focuses on damage. And I guess in the lock picking world, there's picking the locks and then there's figuring out if someone picked or tried to pick your locks. And so picking locks without leaving any trace is really important and really hard to do. And so like the damage on the door, I wouldn't even have considered that at all, but it seemed to really weigh, like in his decision making on how to pick it, how to do it without leaving any damage is important. Another thing that he had talked about that I thought he was going to do for that attack was actually just drill a very small hole in the bottom. And the idea is that who looks at the bottom of their lock, right? Unless you're actually a high security facility and you check for that kind of stuff, I would never even notice a little hole. And so you can drill a tiny hole, reach up, and then grab that mechanism to pick it. And it's effectively not leaving a trace in most cases.
While we're looking at the door, note that Shane welded both of the hinge pins, probably to stop me from popping the pins and declaring victory. And I've got to say, he did the right thing because I
Thank
definitely
goodness.
would have done that. Moving on to the locks, the issue
would
with
have been
the first lock can be fixed easily
just one
by
too many
decreasing
exploits.
the angle of the fins so there's no slope for them to rest on. Frankly, a reverse rake would probably be advisable. With the second lock, the first exploit can be fixed with a slight modification to this moving tailpiece, reclocking that cutout by about...
Yeah, if he wouldn't have found that issue literally the night before, I would have sent him another piece at least just to demonstrate how easy of a fix this is. This part takes 5 minutes on the CNC. Like I could go make one, come back within 10 minutes probably. And so it's super simple, but it was wrong. Whoops.
45 degrees. There are about a dozen ways to fix the picking exploit and deny
I did
access
condition the
back to
pine
lock,
first.
but when I
I just don't know how to do stain.
machined a back cover, which is probably the most expensive solution, but certainly one that works.
Yeah, that solution's terrible.
I hope you
but
all enjoyed this. Shane,
was really fast.
Excellent work on these locks, and thank you so much for sending them my way. To everyone else, that's all I have for you today. If you do have any questions or comments about this, please put them below. If you like this video and would like to see more like it, please subscribe. And as always, have a nice
subscribe.
day. Thank you.
Yeah, so I thought this was really interesting overall. Maybe if I sat and really thought about it for a long time and watched videos, I could have figured these things out, but it would have been really easy to just never even notice the deadbolt thing. The reason that he didn't notice it until right before posting is that he had been working with the lock not in the door, which is exactly what I did too. Like I never really put it in the door to work on it. I always just had it loose. It wasn't until he put it in the door and was like filming, I think, he's like, oh, wait a second. I can do this. And I'm sure he grinned a lot because that's a great find. I think based on my discussions with him, if I were to fix those three things, there really isn't any more known non-destructive entry methods. There probably is more things if you send it to more people. So something that I'm considering doing is maybe souping it up, making a few more and just sending it out to people for fun. I know there's some other lock pickers on YouTube and other places that would love to try it. So I might do that. I don't want to make them myself though, but if I can find a way to get them made, I might do that. And then my main gripe with this is that it just isn't a production lock. The solid shroud that is made from a billet of aluminum, it actually is pretty important structurally and mechanically for the lock functioning. I think that it would need at least one more kind of architectural redesign to make it not sensitive to tolerances, easier and cheaper to make. It would likely change it enough doing that any hardening of this lock would sort of become irrelevant. Kind of like the first lock. If I made the first lock more hardened and more DFM'd, this lock is so different that none of that even applies. That's kind of what I'm thinking about if I make another lock is, do I just want to try to fix those things and do it again? It seems kind of boring. I would like to see at least some real progress towards a real lock, although I still don't have any intention on selling this, but I'm not sure. Something to think about. I'm definitely not working on it now. I'll probably be working on it, I don't know, some point in the future. I've got a lot of stuff queued up. I actually just got some really sweet motors that I'm going to be using for basketball hoop V4, and it is going to be, if it works, very cool. And then I'm going to be working on the EDM as well. And then there's probably 4 more things after that before I could possibly work on the lock again. But it'll probably happen. Talking with the lockpicking lawyer, he had some pretty good ideas. He knew some other lock designs that are much cheaper, in particular wafer locks that could be made to like breed with my lock and then make something really cheap. And so that's just another thing that I'm thinking about. So I'm curious if anyone has any questions or anything that they want to know about. I wish I would have thought of like doing this live while he just launched his video. That would have been kind of fun. Didn't even occur to me. Hopefully y'all enjoyed it. It doesn't look like there's too many other comments or questions. And as always, feel free to drop questions in Discord, and hope you enjoyed it. This is a recording of a Patreon-only live stream that I did a couple weeks ago. I'm planning to do these Q&A live streams for my future videos, so if you'd like to get in on that and also support my videos, check out my Patreon.